Khristi Lauren Adams is the author of three books: Parable of the Brown Girl, Unbossed, How Black Girls Are Leading the Way, and its middle grade companion, Black Girls Unbossed, Young World Changers Leading the Way. She is the Dean of Spiritual Life and Equity and an instructor of religious studies at the Hill School. Khristi is an ordained Baptist minister and a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. You can find out more by visiting her website, which includes links to her books, articles, and interviews at christilaurenadams.com. That's Khristi. And I'll include links to her website and to her books in the show notes. Khristi, thank you so much for coming on. I
Thank you for having me.
appreciate it. Now, I was just going through some of the material that you have online and thinking about the reading that we're going to explore today for Lent, which is the final Sunday, the Palm Sunday. And I was really struck by this sort of 30-second clip you did years ago with a guy named Jim Keat. And it was about the theology of the body. And in it, you talked a little bit about, I mean, it was such a short clip, but
I
you
wish we
talked,
can play it again.
I
I want
know.
to hear it.
I
I'm
should
like,
have.
what
I
did I
should have
say?
queued it up. I'll put a link
You
to
can
it
think
in
about
the.
that.
Well, I can tell you what you said. You were like,
Okay.
when you were growing up, the body was discussed in two ways. It was the resurrection and sexuality,
Ooh.
and then you had this experience actually in a yoga class that invited you into a healthier understanding of the body. And as I was going through your articles, and then I was thinking about books and the conference that you were hosting, the retreats that you were hosting, there was so much about the body and um, how to have a healthy relationship and thinking about what society was saying about the body. And so I'm curious, maybe we just start with your theology of the body and
Ooh.
where, just seeing where that might go.
It's interesting that the 30-second clip was like maybe 10 years ago.
It might
Was it
be,
10?
yeah.
Because I would have a different perspective on the body now as like a
Mm,
40-year-old woman,
right.
and what that looks like. And that has been actually the majority of the conversation with my peers, with my friends. No matter what, one is a pastor. She's a pastor of a Presbyterian church. One is a divorced single mother who is in sales. I'm giving the background on purpose. She's like the regional director of sales. A single woman who has been a dancer her whole life and what that means. So all of us, and then me, and we're all having the same conversations about the body, and we're all
Mm,
believers. Um, but now what happens when with those changes, etc., and what does that mean? How much do we focus on the internal? Should we be apologetic for thinking about the external? um you know i I feel like now I may have a new, maybe newly resurrected, or will be a newly resurrected theology of the body going into this new decade of my life. um so I don't know. I haven't taken yoga, like I haven't really done anything about that. It's just really been on my mind, like what does this mean, God? As
mm,
far as like my existence. And we're asking that not just in age, but also like I think with the pandemic, right? Like the spaces that we had so much value in, the things that we put so much in were sort of put to the test, put on pause, and now not coming out of it, but coming out of it, and so to speak. Um, what does that mean about who I am, my existence, and how I live and move in the world? Like, we were talking about worship yesterday. I have a friend who was a worship leader before the pandemic, and now she's not really going back to that church anymore. and we were joking about online worship and how it just seems repetitive. Like, I'm like, come on, just get to the word already, like in some online worship services, because it seems like it's going on and on and on forever. But I was like, remember when we used to participate in that, but the participation looks different now, like
Right.
worship. So there's just so I sound scattered and all over the place, I think, because that's where we are, trying to rediscover the body and what that means, how we exist in this world, this post-pandemic world. What does worship mean? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a believer? What does it mean to be a human being? How do I navigate the world with this body post these past, 2 years?
And you've worked so closely with young black girls 13 to 18, 13 to 17 in that range,
Mhm, mhm,
which, are teenage years. And I think
mhm.
in particular women or young girls, right? The body becomes this area that's kind of fraught. It's both amazing because I think you're
Mhm,
starting to like there's you're understanding your own sexuality, you're understanding all
mhm,
of these things, but you're getting all of these mixed messages. And
mhm.
as a person who thinks not just about like social place, but also theological place, I'm just curious how you are mentoring these young women, right? All
Yeah,
becoming women, also who are also black in this society that has such a value of white supremacy and like a, aggressively, um, young black women are obviously so targeted.
yeah. I think going back to the body, that
Mm,
conversation looks different, as a teenager than what it looks now as a 40-year-old woman, right? So
mm-hmm,
as a teenager, like what you said, they're exploring their sexuality, but not just sexuality, but their womanhood,
mm-hmm,
what it means to express themselves as a woman, and as what they are discovering is their womanhood, right? Like my friends and I are at a place where we've been there, done that, so
right.
now it's like, who are we now? And we don't have to go there, but they're exploring sexuality, womanhood, and trying to do it in these sort of creative, fumbling their way through, you know, um, I'm trying to get a new wardrobe altogether that expresses who I am now. They're working on their wardrobe, what's to wear, how, just basically almost like how to present themselves into the world. But they're also dealing with um, just the general marginalization, and I think critique that comes in subtle ways and not so subtle ways, from messaging, from just outside societal, just general negativity around Black girls,
Mm,
and who they are and how they exist. So, um, all of those things, they have to learn how to live in the tension of those. Uh, for me, I had to learn how to live in the tension, but I don't know if I had people really highlighting that for me. I think I just dealt with it in silence, couldn't
mm,
really articulate it. So for me, I try to put words or help them find words for where they are, whether it be their frustrations, but also their joys. I mean, there was one girl I wrote about, my first book, Parable, the Brown Girl. She was like, I like wearing different clothes. And she was like, I wish someone had sat me down and said, this is how you dress for your body type, instead of critiquing me, or instead of saying you don't
mm.
need to, etc. So I try to help them exist in the world in a way where they can explore and navigate, but also just just dealing with the realities of the negative messages that society, that they're entering womanhood in an unwelcome space, that's not very accepting of who they are. And so they have to be able to do both, not being like fearful of what's ahead or what they hear, but being prepared and not letting that stop them from continuing in their exploration.
And you just recently wrote this article called "The Audacity." It's on faithandleadership.com, and I'll post a link for it. But you talk about these these two very famous athletes, and on one level they are like they're beloved, and then both of them chose a moment when they're like, I need to step back and take care of myself and prioritize myself. And all of a
Mhm,
sudden, like the the belovedness disappeared because we the audience couldn't
mhm,
consume their body anymore, in a way, like they were there to entertain us through sports. Um and I was thinking about it com- a little bit on this. The reading we're talking about is where Jesus comes before Pilate and then is crucified. And the week before, he rides in celebration, right? And how
mhm,
quickly in a week one moves from like the celebratory crowds to crucifixion. And
mm.
we're talking about Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, and it's like, you know, I don't know. I just was curious if there was anything
Well,
in.
I'm mainly struck by the in the text by the in between of
Mm,
between what happened in the celebration and the crucifixion. Because in the text, we don't get to the crucifixion till the way. I mean,
but
it's almost
yeah,
like really quick.
yeah,
Uh, but this in between are these people who you almost don't even see Jesus in the text because it's all about these people that are trying to figure out what to do with him.
right.
Um, I feel like it's this sort of metaphorical pool table, or ping pong. He's just being thrown around. Here's what to do with him over here. And, no, I don't want him. I'm going to send him back to Pilate. And no, you guys need to do, it's these voices that are around him that are saying what's best for him.
Mm-hmm.
And they're asking him, I mean, I'm not looking at the text now, but it's like, tell us who you are. And he's telling the truth. It's not accepted.
Right.
Um, so it doesn't matter what he says. They're still going to be deciding for him. That's really, I think, what I hear when I think about the article that I wrote, The Audacity, because you have these women that are deciding for themselves, but the people, i.e., us, society around, it doesn't matter. We are resisting even their decision, even their truth. We're resisting that. And their sentence is already like Jesus, right? He already had his death sentence. It was like, what's the point in even going through all this drama? We already
Right.
know how it's going to end, but you're finding all these different ways of justifying it and qualifying and coming up with excuses. But at the end of the day, you're going to make the decision that you want to make uh, regarding him. You're going to come to the conclusion that you want to come to regarding him. So I don't mean to make it like too much of a stretch with those girls, but since you brought up the article or with those young women, I think about Naomi Osaka today. I mean, I wrote that article a few weeks ago, and here we are back with her in the conversation
Right.
as far as the news is concerned, because
Absolutely.
a heckler says, you suck or whatever it might be, and she had a reaction, a very human reaction,
She did.
and chose to display the human reaction and to speak up. So not only did she, she showed her vulnerability, which is not something that people love to see too much, particularly when it comes to women of color. So she displays her vulnerability. She actually she sheds tears. She doesn't hold back, and she goes to the umpire or whoever and says, "Look, this is not acceptable. Can I get the mic?" you know, um, and she's again, here's another sort of making a decision for herself where that is completely acceptable because so many of us have been in positions similar where we have chosen to suck it up and cry in the locker room or cry, when we get home, deal with it then, not say anything, um, and just tough it up. But she resisted that, which I love. Like what we're doing is resistance by not shedding the emotion, right? By not showing that and by going away and dealing with it ourselves. That's the norm. That's not resistance. That's the norm because that's what people expect of women of color.
Right.
But what she did was resistance. And it didn't matter. She lived in her truth. It did not matter because the voices around her are going to continue to just push her around, right? And say what she should have done and she needs to suck it up and she's being too soft and whatever, whatever. The outcome is going to be what society feels like the outcome is going to be regardless. So when I think about the text and I think about how Jesus was just pushed around and shoved and moved and all these different people, be it Pilate and Herod, and then the other religious leaders, whoever was around him, they had their own conclusions, comments about him. He said, "Here's my truth. You can do what you want with it," and they did what
They
they wanted
did.
with it.
Yeah. I also loved like that Naomi's like that the truth telling that she just did, the resistance, right? She connected herself also with others, with the Williams sisters, and like it wasn't just about her, like it became this
Yeah.
kind of this solidarity moment, which was also fantastic. And I saw on your Twitter feed, almost like serendipitously, right? There's this white woman receiving an award, and then like throws them. I
Right.
was like, and she's getting some flack for it, but
Oh, yeah.
it was really stunning the way that she undermined what what the Williams sisters have had to go through
Yeah, she sort of effortlessly
as
did
a
it,
joke.
Yeah, it came out so naturally because I don't
Right.
believe that was a part of her speech,
No,
I mean, like, practiced or rehearsed.
it felt
Um,
extemporaneous.
yeah, it's like she just couldn't help it.
Right. Like I have to deal with the men.
Yeah,
You don't have it as tough as me, which was
right.
stunning.
Yeah, that was it was actually strange. Like, I wonder
Yeah.
if people went back to, like, their people and was like, "What was that?" Because for not even putting the woman of color piece aside, the woman piece. Here we are in Women's History Month. We know better
Right.
than to pin women up against the other comparatively. We know better, right, than to do that now, and then to do that publicly, and then you're playing oppression Olympics, it's like, I have it worse than you. What? And then they're completely two arenas. One did not had have anything to do with the other. I mean, it was just so random.
And I think one at least one of the sisters was in the audience, I think.
Yeah, it was Venus.
Yeah.
The camera panned over to her and she was like,
Yeah.
okay, Actually, they both were.
Oh, were they both there?
They both
Yeah.
were there, but the camera only went over to
Went to Venus,
Venus.
yeah.
Yeah, so
And so I'm thinking about this, also this conference that you have. And I don't know how much COVID has just like
oh, yeah, it
derailed
has
it,
quite a bit. Yes.
right? But it's called The Becoming.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I at this time of the year, obviously for preaching purposes, I actually I play this twist on the term. People use the phrase like coming of Christ and things like that, and I
Mm,
actually phrase it as the becoming of Christ.
mm,
And so, because for me, there's this moment of the cosmic Christ that I like. What happens when we all
mm,
come into the experience of it? But
mhm,
it's not like it's delivered to me or us from afar. It's actually we become it. So when I saw your conference was called Becoming, I was like, oh, that's so great. But I
Mhm.
I think you are using it in the sense of, well, maybe there's a play in there as well, right? Like there's this becoming women
Mhm.
and becoming, or maybe even living into the child of God. Like, what is that? Like, what is our becoming? I don't know.
Yeah. Becoming, I have like a little like description of what it is on the
Mm-hmm.
site and I don't remember what those exact words are, but it is about this process of moving into adulthood, young adulthood, evolving as women, evolving as young Black and Brown women. Um, and I try to create a space that speaks into that, that gives them permission to. We have like the little logo is like a little bud, like a little green bud, because the idea is that they,
Right.
could have been a caterpillar, but that's like kind of cheesy.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is like a little bud, and eventually they'll grow into what we don't know. But that they need spaces of nurturing those
Mm-hmm.
seeds, and and when they are subject to so much negativity and marginalization, that stunts that growth. That those aren't spaces of fertile ground for them to be nurtured. They're spaces for them to be picked at, uh, to hide, to cower away from who they really are. I experienced that, I feel like, as a young Black girl growing up. I had some good spaces of nurturing, and then I had just the amount, very similar spaces, that did the opposite, that I feel like were pulling, trying to uproot me. And to be uh, young Black girls dealing with living in that tension all the time of having spaces where they grow, and then no, 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 spaces where we pull you back,
Mm-hmm.
that's a constant, and it makes it really difficult for them to discover who they are, who they were created to be, uh, to discover why, God put them on the earth in the first place. It's like you can't even get to that because there's so much, you're just constantly being pulled back. So, I tried in the beginning, the Becoming Conference, to create these, like, one-day conferences, like, one-day spaces, and, I realized in the last few years that it's, like, not enough. So, we didn't have Becoming for 2 years, pandemic,
You're right.
related, and then we had a retreat last year of like 20 young leaders, girls. Um, and I actually had them read the first manuscript of Unbossed because it hadn't come out then.
Oh,
We
cool.
went through all the different chapters. One of the girls is actually in Becoming.
Oh,
And we had like a 3-day, I call it a leadership retreat, and we just, we went away and I just focused on them. And we did that. I had them watch Lord of the Flies. I don't know what else, but I also like, we did these like we went on these nature walks, things that just caters to their being and wellness. And so I think in the future, Becoming is not going to be one day quick conferences anymore. I'm
mm-hmm.
going to do, wellness, wholeness, spiritual focus, like 3-day retreats
Mm,
for young Black girls, because I feel like, particularly post pandemic, I feel like they need that.
mm.
I think one day is like hard because it's like quick and then it's done. And they need to be able to go. One thing I realize about Black girls is like I like to provide these spaces for them where they can go and just exist, like exhale and just turn off and not have to be on the defense all the time, or having to explain themselves, to just relax. It takes a minute. So when I do the one-day conferences, by the time they get there, it's over.
Right.
So, I'm gonna focus on smaller groups and retreats moving forward.
And I was thinking about your conference. So we're recording this in the second week of Lent, and so the reading that I'm using right now for Lectio Divina is, let me just see if I can pull it up real quick. Um, it is Luke 13, the lament over Jerusalem. And they're
Mm,
talking about, like, the Pharisees go to see him. They're like, hey, get away from here. Herod wants to kill you, which is so
mhm,
interesting because we're used to them thinking of
mhm.
them as like trying to kill him.
Trying to, yeah.
But it also, but then it goes on, there's this part in here where he's like, I'm here for 3 days, then I'm leaving because you can't kill me
Mm,
outside of Jerusalem, 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 the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. And I actually was thinking about Black Lives Matter
mhm,
and how um, it's this message that doesn't, Jerusalem is not so excited about it,
mhm,
right? And um, it happens, but you can't kill it when it's outside of Jerusalem. Like it's moving in this other space, and so kind of bringing it back to what you were talking about with the reading for Palm Sunday of Jesus getting pushed around, and thinking about your conference of like making sure that there's a space where people aren't pushed around. I don't know. It
mm,
just was, that's sort of where I was sitting this morning about people coming in because people are forced to go into the center,
mm, mhm,
you know, thinking about these two sports, these athletes that are there. They want to
mm,
make a living. They want, and the money's at the center. And
mm,
then there's, you get stoned, right? You get torn apart for, you're there consumed for a while, and then maybe you're
mm,
made left a hero, maybe you're not, but you
mhm.
deviate from the narrative and you're stoned. And then also this conference that you're creating that um, I think that at one point you were having it at your parents' house or something like that, like
I
not at the
think I had,
center,
yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah, I have to
but
find anywhere for those.
right, but like a space that isn't, uh, somewhere outside of Jerusalem in a
Yeah,
way,
it's it's necessary. It's difficult to do that though, because there's
right?
not, I don't know, I felt like maybe when I was younger there were more of those spaces like with
Right,
church, like we go places, but um it's difficult to do that for younger ones, but it's, you gotta get, they have to be able to have access. So this is going back to, there was a chapter in Unbossed that's about a woman, young woman named Amara Feji, who's talking about environmental. She's an environmental activist or climate justice activist, but there's a lot of overlap with racial justice, and so she's always talking about environmental equity and how young people, of particularly people of color, don't have access to those, to
mm-hmm.
the environment, to be able to gain a love for the environment. So she's like, she lives in Maine, so of course Maine
Oh
is
yeah,
beautiful, and she's like, I love Maine, all of that, but so many, whether it's economically, don't have access, so they're not living in these spaces of greenery. They're living in more urban environments that are much more dense and don't necessarily have the you know the landscape. But then also that added layer of like the Trayvon Martin generation of like, we can't go outside because it's
right,
too dark, and I don't can't put my hoodie on. There's too many like barriers in the way of young black and brown kids like even having a love for the outdoors, because again, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier about how you have a seed and the seed tries to blossom or whatever, but then you're trying to nurture it, but these other things that come and pull them back, and they might love, Amar's whole thing is they might love the outdoors,
right,
but they don't get an opportunity to, because there's all these things in the way that say you can't go out after this, you can't go, don't go into that neighborhood, don't jog if you're Maud Arbery, like those types of things. So I say all that to say it makes it difficult. It's that makes it imperative and difficult. It's imperative that I find those types of spaces for these young girls because there's so many that, even when I went last year, it was like, where are we? This is nice, like, and I'm like, let's go on a walk, let's go on a nature walk,
Right.
let's take some time and journal out of the what, those types of things. And they're like, okay, and they did, and they loved after 3 days. In the beginning, it was like, we want pizza, we want this, like they were complaining. And then after on the third day, it was like, wow, I really needed this. But I feel like I have to provide that environment to nurture that, so that has that space. But it's so difficult to find the spaces and then to get the girls out to the space. And so I'm going to, yeah, that's my focus. But it does overlap with this whole idea of like environmental, like the girls needing to be in a space that nurtures that seed so that it can grow.
And I'm thinking about like Jerusalem as sort of the metaphor for like the place of power and privilege and
Mm,
access to all of these things. And so we want to go there. And then, but sometimes there's really a cost as well. Like you get there and
mm,
there are these wonderful things, but then, just as we've seen with Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles, like it will also kind of tear you down if you deviate. And it's like, well, it doesn't the truly
yeah.
unfairness of it, right? Of having to
Well,
find
it
this
goes
thing. Yeah.
back
Yeah.
it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning when we were talking about the body, and you were asking what I say to the girls, and I'm like, you
Mm,
have to live in both. Like,
right.
they have to be prepared at that young age to be able to explore and have fun and dive into their passions, but then also knowing what they're up against at the same time, the critique that's going to come, those types of things. That has to start very young for them,
Right.
so that this is no surprise when they get to, and Naomi's still very young, so they're in their 20s, but working with young 13-year-old girls
Right.
in that manner is really just preparing them for those spaces. I mean, Serena and Venus, they've been there, done that, you know. It doesn't mean that it doesn't sting every time. But they're prepared for those moments in that Jerusalem space, right? That it's like this is here they are at the people's, what is it, critic awards or whatever, and they're dressed up and beautiful and they've arrived. Yet here's that other space of
Right.
tension that they were prepared for when they were 13 years old, having to deal with both.
Yeah. And so when you read this passage, this, the crucifixion and all of it that goes up to it, like the phony trial, and I'm just curious how you tell this story. Like how do you tell this story?
Uh, it's kind of like what I said. I'm looking at it now. What
Hmm.
I said to you earlier. It's like there's the beginning part, the bringing him in, the truth, and then everything in the middle is yada 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 to me. I mean, it truly,
Right.
truly is. I mean, it's just a waste of time. you know,
Right.
like there's no point in even focusing on it. Even though, the things that they were saying, it's like I remember being younger, particularly being a young minister, and when you're reading this passage and you're looking for something in this middle section, something, and we
Hmm.
try to pull from it, okay, I want to read, this little part. Let me just try to go like, before he's like sentenced to death. But this beginning, Jesus before Pilate, and then Jesus before Herod. I mean, boom, boom, and then he's called together the chief priests. You bought me this man, and they have this trial. I mean, it's just pointless. It really, truly is.
Right.
I feel like Jesus was probably like, let's just get on with it. You're going to kill me anyway, you know? And I have a hard time now. I think before, when I was a younger minister, would like really find some real significance in the trial and all of that. But I mean, honestly, if I was preaching a sermon on this, it would be titled, They Were going to Do It Anyway, Um, and what does that mean when about who who we are, how we exist in this world when they've already concluded who you are? And I think that's the justice message, right? Like, I think that ties everything that we've been saying. Because Jesus knew his truth, he spoke his truth, yet it was already written, it was already done, they'd already made up their mind, they're literally going through the motions. And so when we think about the Serena Williamses or Venus or whatever, it's like the ones that have already made up there, it doesn't matter if you know, are getting in awards and you're winning
Mm,
all these tournaments and you're, Time Magazine Woman of the Year or whatever. Society has already sentenced you because you were born a Black woman, you know? So knowing that, um, it's not necessarily you have a negative mindset, right? Like that's we're not saying that so that you can, be defeated. That means that you have to exist in your truth on a different level in this world. That your success to you has to be differently defined. Um, because if Venus Williams would have walked out of there, easily could have walked out of there defeated.
right.
Um, but success to her, it seems like that family is about their values and about their purpose and those types of that are sort of like beyond the success is money and these people that love me and you know will never you'll always feel like a failure if that's where your success is. And so Jesus knowing who he was going into that and then going through the charade of being back and forth and then going through the farce of the trial, knowing what the outcome was going to be, but still living in his truth, still speaking his truth, but still living in his truth, knowing his purpose and all of that. That's a lesson for us, I think. Um, because the frustration of reading the middle part for me of just thinking, what is the point? You know,
Hmm.
it mirrors a lot of our lives in the sense of like, if we focus too much, I think, on the back and forth of the Twitter comments that, that I got some Twitter comments to my
Yeah,
thing,
you
and it's like,
did. Yeah.
am I gonna respond to them?
Hmm.
Or what you see the comments that are trending, they've already made up their mind. They're going back and forth. There's nothing you're going to be able to say that's going to change what people think about Naomi Osaka or, you know. Um, so what do we do with that? Knowing that in the end, it's going to be crucifixion anyway.
But I feel like that could lead to an opportunity of nihilism, right? Where it's just like
Mm,
it's predetermined, right? But
mm,
you don't strike me that way at all. In fact, so
no.
much of your life is committed to the opposite of nihilism. And so if they've decided, if Jerusalem's decided, if white people have decided, like whatever, right?
Right, but then that's
Like,
where the spiritual part comes in because
uh-huh.
God, it's like, that would be the hope at the end of the sermon,
Right,
right? Like, if this
right.
is a Baptist sermon,
Bring
you
me to
bring
the
it
hope,
home with
preacher.
God has the final say, you know what I
Okay.
mean? Like, that's where you go. I mean, if that's that is what my mind is on, right?
Right.
If, the reason why I'm existing in this world is the purpose that God has put me on this planet for. What Jesus is like for me is it looks like you can crucify me. I'm still going to do the purpose that God has put me on this earth for. And I will resurrect in the end, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have the final say. They might think that they have the final say. They've decided what they're going to. They're going to have their trials. I hate to be pessimist, but it's kind of like saying, will racism ever end? And people are like, no, like,
Mm-hmm.
what, but, but what does that mean if we sort of know in the back of our head that the poor will always be with us, like if we know that these social issues that particularly in this regard, like racism and misogyny, and that there will be pockets of hope. But if we know that we're not defeated, we still have a purpose, that God has an ultimate plan, right? That is more of my focus as opposed to like it's sort of like the world around me can come to their conclusions and have their trials. That's totally up to them. But I'm not living in that space. That there's like a sort of transcendent space for me, and this is where the spiritual comes in. Like that's very. worldly. Like racism and that's very worldly. We're moving beyond that, and God allows us to transcend that space. I think as um what I try to share with the young girls, particularly young Black girls that I work with, is that you can transcend. you know, you get to a place where you transcend all of it. That you're still. I don't know if you mentioned Niebuhr, but like Christ in culture. That Christ
Hmm.
like lives in culture. Like walks alongside culture, but also transcends culture. I
Hmm.
just think that that has to be how we navigate the world and these realities too.
Khristi, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.